So we initially started working here at Rosendale with the Year 3 team, and one of the kind of focuses that we we were going to look at was about telling the story of every single learner. Hi, I'm Tom Barrett, and I'm a senior consultant at Notosh, and I've been working with Rosendale Primary School for the last year and a half now, and I'm going to talk to you today about our Learning Reflections project. I mean, in terms of developing that, what the solution might potentially be, it was very much about understanding where this particular group of teachers had been before, and knowing, the very practical realities of trying to implement such a system across a whole class, across a whole year. And so we were, they explained, so the Year 3 teachers explained to me how they'd try to use like an iPad system with spreadsheets and various tick box type of thing to post-it observations, which they just were kind of completely snowed under. That type of thing I'd seen and used myself before, in foundation teaching and in reception. In that statement, how might we better tell the story of every single learner? It was the we bit that was really important. How might we, and who that is actually at the heart of the issue. Because all of the systems have been predicated previously on the teacher being the sole arbiter of observation, reflection, and being able to capture learning. And so I immediately kind of knew that potentially was something that we could change. And so instead of how might we, but how might the learner better tell their own story? And so pushing the focus and the emphasis back onto the learner at the right time throughout their time in primary, and potentially equipping them with the tools and the kind of language to be able to kind of capture their own journey. So my thinking started to turn towards those types of things, and I started to think, okay, maybe we're looking at this from the wrong angle. A lot of the prototypes had failed previously, and that was just to do with the teacher doing it. And so we wanted to kind of move that initially away from them and to be able to equip a learner in any kind of year group to be able to do it themselves. Some of the early discussions kind of made me think quite specifically what I envisaged a solution to potentially be. One of the things, again, you kind of look at what it's been before, these kind of maybe often large kind of reflective moments done by the teacher where there's kind of big spikes in the graph. And what I was imagining, and what eventually we've started to kind of build, is something that is an aggregation of smaller reflections, rather than large reflections at the end of every half term, for example, about learning done by the teacher. More frequent, more often, and the aggregation of these tiny pieces of a kind of that would add to a kind of a greater mosaic of learning over time. And so we needed to kind of equip the learner with the kind of the ability to reflect on their learning, and that was actually one of the biggest challenges. Was actually helping them with the language around learning and giving them some structure and some constraint there. In terms of the technology, we knew that we would, technology would allow us. We're probably thinking straight away, is there something we could do that's probably mobile driven? Something that's going to enable us to kind of just reach and just pick up something and do something with it, but it kind of needs to be kind of on tap, and that on tap nature is always something that I felt is the most powerful way to use technology in the classroom. If I need to use it, then I'll reach for it and I've got access to it. So we kind of had to build that kind of concept around capturing moments of learning in a more frequent fashion and smaller pieces, and the kind of the way that we organised that volume of reflections needed some specific concepts that probably were taken from technology, which for us and we kind of in our discussions was this notion of tagging learning, so being able to add a label to those moments in a kind of intelligent and quite structured way that would make it, in the future, much more shareable, in the future more discoverable, to potentially go back and say, what was my stuff that I did in geography when I was looking at coastal stuff or whatever it might be. I could go back and find those individual words and actually see learning that's taken place in the past. So this sort of tagging kind of focus needed to kind of be built, and that probably was one of the first things that we started to do in the classroom with these Year 3 teachers. It's so important to kind of think about what you've got in school, what technology you've got in school. So this new solution isn't going to need, it may well need some new investment, but it's actually going to use the capacity that you've already got. And so that was part of a much boring part of the remit, was to actually make sure that technology was being used in the classroom. And so the old Windows netbooks, the other computers that potentially, are 2 or 3 years old that are in school, the kind of key thing here is we don't kind of sideline them with technology for such a solution that only works on certain devices. So we kind of looked at Evernote, which is a simple note-taking application, and we'll no doubt talk a bit more about it, and you'll be able to see some examples. But specifically, what you could do is take capture small moments, and those moments could be tagged. And that tagging concept was something that we were exploring in terms of capturing learning, pupils reflecting upon their own learning as a formative assessment device, a procedure within the classroom. And it obviously was this particular app, this particular technology could be used across all different platforms. So I could use it with iPads that we were going to potentially invest in. We could use it with the iPod Touches that work really well. We could use it on Windows PC netbooks. It could be online, it could be offline, etc. The tagging concept was something that we really did have to focus on offline. As soon as we started using the technology and getting into it, the kind of concept and the importance of actually doing that, we kind of realised that probably we need to build this concept much broader and more broadly within the classroom. So you would walk into a Year 3 classroom at that point, and what you would see is paper tags that have been drawn out, so like kind of a suitcase tag, and they would be up on the walls. They would be indicating the kind of category of particular work that you would see physically in the room. So you would imagine a simple display of some artwork that's been done, and there would be maybe 3 different tags that have been put up there, maybe art, paint, or some sort of indication of the medium. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put everything in the eye line of the learner, and so help them better understand that this concept that they're going to be part of can easily be done without technology. And in fact, some of the most powerful reflections that were done in that time were done offline. And it's actually, you can just do it simply by talking to peers, having a simple kind of shoulder buddy kind of type of thing, or with, teacher's pupil, or even just having a simple piece of paper that asks for a group of tags about that moment in your learning and a space to kind of reflect. And actually that, for us, was some of the kind of core work that went on in Year 3 around developing the concept of tagging. The other thing about it I think is really important and we mustn't lose sight of is that fact that when I'm actually categorizing, as I'm a learner, I'm categorizing this moment in my learning. It's actually can actually be a very powerful device, a very powerful process, because I'm not only reinforcing and consolidating this moment and what it is. So it's maths, and am I doing addition and subtraction here? What is it I'm doing? I'm actually asking those questions in my mind, and I'm having to make a specific decision. So what I've just done is I've just loaded up a browser, and I'm not able to just use software I can download and use it without any internet connection. I can just go into a browser and I can log into an account. So long as I can get on the web, or I have my device I use more frequently, I'm able to kind of access my work. So a lot of the stuff is, that's such an important thing, because obviously, we were able to kind of access the information really, really easily. And I've just logged into the Year 6 account. So the whole year group has an account, and you log in with one account. So the children aren't actually aren't kind of doing that type of thing every day. They're not switching between accounts. When I said that I want them to reach for the device and capture something, there's no barrier in the way to that, and I think that's really important to do with any technology implementation. In terms of a solution for what we want, the barriers need to be kind of removed, so the learner just gets to the crux of what they were actually intending. So it's interesting, I've just logged in, and I can see things that have happened just moments ago. So it says here, moments ago, or 5 seconds ago, this was captured. Somebody just did some guided reading 11 seconds ago, you know? So I can actually see 7 minutes ago that somebody did something around Philip Pullman in year 6, the scarecrow and his servant. And I think that there's no finer indication of what we're trying to build than that type of thing. This type of thing, this suddenly kind of being able to access and get a very clear sense of what learning is like within my school and within our school. And but this this transaction of information doesn't happen frequently enough, and I think we kind of we can get too caught up just letting it go off and in the kind of, you know, out there. And we know that it's happening, and somebody might come and tell us, but I think it's important that if this is going to be valued really highly as it should, then this type of thing should, you know, this interaction with that archive needs to happen quite regularly. Because I could go to that year 6 class and I could suddenly have a shared context with some of those children, which they probably wouldn't, you know, maybe you wouldn't normally have. You have a greater sense of what's going on. So I think it's, you know, amazing and powerful, and I'm always delighted to be able to kind of log in and see what's kind of happening, especially when it tells me this was happening kind of 11 seconds ago or whatever. The senior leadership team here at Rosendale kind of pushed us to really consider the rigour around that kind of moment, because it would be much more useful rather than just a free-for-all on the tags that we would have. And so we looked at having 3, and this is actually how it's sort of developed and how it is still now, a subject-specific tag. So that would be like the core thing. So what's on the front of your book, you know, maths, and that would be the kind of main kind of body of stuff, just subject-related. And then topic or kind of content-driven tag, which could be 2 to 3. You know, it might only just be 1, but it could be something as like, so your subject tag is maths, your content tag is subtraction or number line or something like that. And then there was this sort of outer layer that we were really interested in exploring. The reason we're doing it was sort of kind of twofold, in the sense for the learner it was a process that would consolidate their thinking about that moment in learning. And there was this stuff around emotional tagging as well, which was this third layer, which no doubt I think we could spend all day talking about and how that could potentially develop. So there's, for the learner themselves, it should be kind of a powerful moment to consolidate things and to encourage reflection about those moments in learning. For a teacher and for the senior leadership team and for people coming to that resource from the outside rather than being from the inside and building it out, it actually, you know, we need to be able to discover things. We have to use it as a rich resource to be able to help me inform what's happening in this place. You know, what's happening with my group of 30 children. What's the writing like in my year group? So tagging was important because as a kind of a teacher, I need to be able to have a consistent access. And what I mean by that is that if you've got 90 children in a year group, and you wanted to do some analysis around how a particular group of children in your class or your whole class were doing in their writing compared to the rest of the year group, there needed to be a really consistent approach to the way things were being recorded. And so tagging, obviously being able to put a specific label on anything, if that label wasn't there, the chances of actually being that moment in learning or that example of where it being discoverable is greatly reduced. So there needs to be, and there still needs to be, a kind of a consistent approach to that, and having a very clear understanding about why that's important for me as a learner, and also why the teachers need to keep that profile raised consistently, and saying this is important for you as a learner, but also so we can discover your work. So one of the things that I'm continually impressed with is how quickly children have been able to kind of use a very simple structure for reflection. And we know that a simple basis around with informative assessment, and what we know from so much that has been written over the last 10 years is if I have a confidence about what my learning's been like before, what my learning is like now, what's happening now, and what my next steps are in terms of the future, then I have potential to, basically to achieve greater things, and to have a kind of a more confident outlook to it in terms of my learning. And I think that was something that we introduced quite quickly, was that we needed there's structure around the tagging, and that was helping them to be, to really be specific about that moment and what that moment was, if we were to label it. But this structure around what they would actually reflect on needed some sort of pinning down. And I think that 3-point reflection is something that's actually been very easy for children to hook into. And so through a process of modelling with teachers, being able to model that conversationally, being able to sort of draw that out in just a discussion, to be able to, the teachers then to model that in a written form, what does that look like? And for then the kind of kids to be able to use that in their work was really important. So these are the children's little kind of portfolios. The numbers next to it are showing me how many notes or reflections those children have done. We've got a class stack, so they've been grouped together, and I can see 6JP here is the one I'm looking at, and obviously 6GT, etc. And below that will be the third class. You can see that this group of children have made 1,343 reflections since sort of starting in September, so in a couple of months. On the right hand side here, I've selected Lola's notebook, and Lola's notebook, you can see a little column here of all of the different notes that she has saved, and you can see that she's written a title, and there's various moments throughout her kind of time. She's got stuff on comic life, maths, and stuff to do with literacy specifically. And then this sort of third column over here is basically the detail of one of those notes that I've selected, and this is kind of typical of what the children are doing at the moment. And I'm just I'll quickly talk through what you've got. So on this side here, you've got a few bits of information. We'll have a look at the details in a second. This shows me which notebook it's in. This is the title of this particular reflection, and we can clearly see here her use of that 3-point reflection. Before yesterday's lesson, I had never been to the new ICT Speak or used Comic Life, so it was a new experience for me. Me and my partner Zola worked together to make a comic strip about designing your baby, good or bad. And in the future, I would like to definitely use Comic Life more because it was so thrilling. And so she's kind of, she's thought about the kind of 3 points. So a 3-point reflection. And typically, children would take a picture of their work. That's something that they enjoy doing. And it's a very easy way to kind of jog the memory, to capture that moment, whatever it might be. If we quickly go up to over here, we can see show details. And in the details here, you can see in this little row is the tags. One of the problems is that it's often hidden away. And I would love it if the tags were much more up front and much more clearer to the kids, because as you saw, I had to click on that, and it's often the same with other platforms. You can see she's tagged it really fun, Comic Life, Design a Baby, and Project. And so she's kind of been able to, she's got all the 3 things we want really in there. Project being the subject, Comic Life is the kind of topical content, and Design a Baby potentially in terms of what they're doing, the topic. And really fun is her reaction to this particular moment in learning. So when kids when they think about their reflections, they're thinking about a 3-point plan. A simple 3-point reflection about where have I been, where am I now, where's next. And actually, that last question of thinking, where am I going to go to? And I still think there's another little kind of sub question, if you like, which is how am I going to get there? Because it's all very well having an intention about where's my learning going to, but if I don't actually have the means with which, or the clear understanding about how do I close that gap, then that kind of goal can often be slightly empty and meaningless unless I'm able to say, you know what, I know where I'm going to, and I know that I need to do this to get there. I think that's very different and much more powerful if I have that kind of complete picture about what's next. The kind of third kind of group, if you will, of tags that we've been developing the kind of concept of is emotion or emotional tagging. And we wanted children to be able to reflect upon the subject content at the heart of it, the content or the topic around that moment in their learning, and then something to do with their emotional attachment to a significant moment in their learning. And I've been kind of wrestling with this notion off and on for the last year and a half, really, about this, whether this is right, whether this is something that's meaningful, whether it's important to do this. And I think at the heart of the reasoning behind it is around encouraging our learners to be more fluent with that language around learning, which naturally includes emotion, and for them to be more confident with the way that they talk about their emotions when things are great and then when things are really tough and really tricky, because that whole picture just is much more powerful than just part of that picture. And so I've kind of thought to myself, is every moment of learning significantly emotional? Do we always have those moments, and do we always feel something when we're kind of in school learning? And I kind of for a while just assumed that was the case, but I absolutely know now that it isn't the case. Learning is every shade. It's as banal as magnolia, and as exciting as red sometimes, and as calm as blue, and it can be all of those things in a school day for pupils. And I think it's wrong for us to kind of say, if you're going to tag this, you're going to have this reflection, you have to write an emotional tag. And what we were finding is that they were just putting down these kind of generic statements because it was a procedure that they needed to kind of fulfill. And I suppose I would shift things ever so slightly. The nuance here is just to kind of encourage the learner to be able to say, I actually am aware of my emotion. I understand that this is something significant here. It's one of those aha moments where something's just clicked and it feels right, and they're very proud of something, or it's something that's really painful and it's like, again, I've not got it right, I'm still struggling. There's those moments where it's very obvious and the emotion just comes through very clearly. And then there's times when they don't feel anything, that they're reflecting on their learning and it's an important moment, but it's not significantly emotional. And I think that nuance is quite interesting. But again, at the heart of it, we're just trying to develop that language for them. The language of reflection in itself, and as part of that, the language of emotion. One of the key things that we were building was this concept that any stakeholder around that child would be able to see and access and use that information to better inform their practice. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're really in the mode of making the most of that kind of archive yet. And I think that's the challenge to come. I think there's still some work to do with building this kind of strong, robust foundation of activity. But I do think that we've got to quickly shift from that, for us just focusing on reflecting and capturing, to, okay, as a teacher, what does this mean to me? How can I use it? As a TA, how do they use that information to better inform their practice? The language is a real barrier, actually. It's actually, again, it's one of those situations where I was, we were in school, we were working with classes, we were kind of helping them, modelling through sort of discussion with them about how they might reflect, and we were kind of watching the children, writing stuff down, or they were sharing things they'd written already, and everything was written, everything was around language, and I started to kind of question that, the access point there. I just wondered if, in fact, what we're doing is we're making it less accessible for some children, or harder at least. So, a couple of things that we've started to do, and I think this would be good again to put these roots down around how you analyse some of these reflections. Last week, I sat and had a look on two things: the quantitative data that we can get from these learning reflections. So this is across the whole school. At this point, every year group, every child has got access to technology which would allow them to capture their learning and capture that story. And what I did, I concentrated on specific year groups where I could actually see just pure numbers and times when they were doing it, information like that. So what we've got here is just a simple visualization of that kind of process. You can see here that this year 6 group have done 1,286 notes and reflections saved. You can see the kind of the breakdown of which particular year group that is. I can see here when they were doing that. They were doing it a lot in October and November, sort of evened out. September when they were just starting. Imagine being able to kind of use some of these things in the future when you have a much more mature, robust, consistent approach to learning reflections and how you might use these. So another thing I looked at was these. So this is the emotional tags that the children have used to signal those reflections. And you can see here that they've got over 150 things that have been tagged fun and easy, and it goes down confident, challenging, cool. And I also looked at, actually through discussion with the year sixes, I spent some time just, what's the opposite, what's boring and what's struggling and stuff. And it's just amazing to be able to kind of paint a picture of learning through some of these things. And over here you've got the commonly used tags as well. So I can see that they're doing a lot of stuff around maths and literacy, and they've used the word easy quite a lot. So what does that tell me? Does that tell me that their perception of the work that they're doing is easy? I mean, it's been tagged over nearly 90 times in the course of a couple of months. So, we can sort of slice this information up in a really interesting way. And I also did something here, just most random tags. And this is, again, it allows, we're allowing children to write their own tags as much as we want this consistent approach. And I, in fact, think this is really interesting. On one hand, we could easily just say, we just want them to choose from an existing set. And it's like, here's the subjects, here's the topics, here's the emotional work, the language we want to use. But, would we ever have got simples being a kind of an example of a tag someone's put, or crazy but true, this one, same old, And I think that what you've got there is you've got the first inclination of the shades of language and the shades of expression around learning, and what makes it so brilliant is that those moments for those individual children will mean something quite specific to them. And I think with such a system, it could be very, very locked down. And I think actually what you're seeing with this and with some other examples from the other year groups is that given the platform, children are starting to find their voice and are starting to use it to express themselves in quite a unique way. And I don't think that we've seen that before. And so I would want this. This sort of the ability for every learner to be able to say whatever they want about that learning. Whether they say easy peasy lemon squeezy, which was a year 4 tag, which probably goes down as my personal favourite, but they can actually say whatever they like about it. That's just as meaningful as saying the work was easy, even more so maybe. And I think that the tagging kind of structure that we're going to create needs to have that kind of random variety and that kind of place to sort of express yourself uniquely. It was in those early days when we were basically describing what we wanted. We were talking about the brief, and we were describing this sort of time in the future when you would be able to tap in and see this sort of live sort of bubble of learning that's taking place. This kind of this ongoing kind of stream of reflection. This ability for us as a group of kind of leaders within school to be able to tap into that, and be much closer, rub up against much closer to the learning that's happening in our school. And so we said things like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just search a great archive of reflections for the word happy, and all we would see is just the happy moments that have happened today or in the last hour. Or if we could search and then we started, we loved all that, happy, yeah, and all that. But then we started to think, okay, what would it be like if you could search for something that's been tagged struggling, or tricky, those times when, the full picture of learning as well. So we started to kind of talk about that. And I still think that there's some really interesting work to do around how you might build that archive. And we're on our way. but then what you do with the archive and how you might use that to inform and to develop school culture, as well as kind of specifically how you might how it might have an impact on teaching and learning. I mean, it's interesting because the actual kind of work, the kind of work that's sort of saved is very searchable just because it's being digitized, and stuff that Evernote does, which again we're probably not really tapped into as much, is if I take a photograph of handwriting, then that photograph, if the handwriting is clear enough, then the actual words on that page within the photograph can be searched. And I think that yes, I kind of understand how if there isn't a tag, then there isn't a consistent approach to it. But if the child has written the word anywhere saying writing, then it's clear enough, even if that's the title within Evernote or the written word on a photo of an example of work in their books, it will be found. And I suppose there lies some particular strengths in how in this particular platform and the way we approach it. I think the concept of tagging is still probably one of the most important things, and it does need to be established in the classroom with it in terms of a concept for young learners in a very rigorous way. It needs to be consistently done throughout the environment. So I need to be able to see what tagging is. I need to be able to make that connection with what it appears like in a digital platform. But probably it does definitely need to start in an analog fashion all around me. The second thing I would focus on, I think, would be around the language of reflection. And I think that there's probably a lot that could be done in terms of amplifying what already happens in school. There's a lot of PSHE work around emotional development, and a lot of kind of PSHE work around reflecting upon moments within school. And I think that actually just amplifying some of those things in a greater sense and sort of joining them up a little bit and making a very kind of common thread throughout school would really help build a really strong foundation for reflection and how you would build it on. Because at the heart of what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to develop a learner who is confident and can reflect kind of positively and constructively on what the next steps in their learning are. And I think that in terms of the language can often be a barrier. So I would concentrate on that as a development. Probably the third thing would be this sort of holistic nature of everything, really. I think I've kind of grown to better understand how some things can get in the way of our reflections, how maybe we need to start at a different point. I think we certainly build this platform, but I think that platform can be used in so many different ways. I think that tagging and the whole idea of reflection can kind of give us some constraint that we want. But then I do also think that we can look at it in a slightly different view. For example, we've been exploring how if I present some pictures to a learner, especially young children, and use those pictures as a starting point to then say, actually my learning this week has been a bit like this picture, rather than starting with the actual moment itself. And so sort of switching it around. So rather than saying, I'm having a significant moment in my learning, and now I'm going to think about my emotions, actually start with a picture that kind of encourages and kind of inspires us to think about what we see in an image, and then sort of saying, okay, well actually that time when I was doing this in my learning was actually just a bit like that. And so thinking about that whole view, using images especially, is something that I would be really interested to support the kind of younger learners as they start to become more reflective as they go through school.